we go. Can you guys see that? Okay, here we go. So if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. How on earth does that relate to homeopathy, you might wonder? Well, homeopathy is actually an energetic therapy. It's composed of very dilute substances. And it was discovered, I would say discovered 230 years ago by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. And here's a picture of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. Here you go. So Samuel Hahnemann was a doctor with the Habsburg Empire. This was during the Austro-Hungarian era, and he was very disgruntled with the way that homeopathy was being with the way the medicine was being practiced, because at that time they were doing a lot of bloodletting, leeching. They weren't practicing any kind of hygiene. You know, they would give birth to children without washing their hands. They would do operations without washing their hands. So the mortality was very high. So Samuel Hahnemann must have been about 26 years old when he left the profession of being a physician. And what he decided to do was do a lot of research. So his father-in-law was a pharmacist. And what he started to do was he spoke like 12 languages: Latin, Greek, Italian, most of the European languages. And he started translating books at that time to keep himself busy. And he did a lot of reading. And he went back all the way to the books of Hippocrates, of Paracelsus, of Galen, and all the predecessors of modern medicine. And what struck him was when he was reading the books of Paracelsus and translating them, he came upon this concept of hygienism. So what hygienism is, Hippocrates actually promoted in the very beginning not to take medicine, although he's the father of modern medicine. What he wanted people to do was keep a clear mind, eat well, breathe fresh air, drink clean water, and then maintain a level of health wherein you don't need medication. And it's only when you're exposed to the elements, like you get cold, you get sick, you get exposed to bacteria, and your vital force isn't strong enough to withstand it, that's the only time he espoused taking tinctures. You know, back in the day, they were using herbal tinctures. They were using tinctures of compounds made out of causticum and baking soda and mercury and phosphorus. And a lot of them were also considered poisonous. Even though they healed you, they had a lot of negative side effects as well. So he was putting all of these things together of the books that he read. Another one that really struck him was the writings of Paracelsus. Paracelsus was an alchemist, and he was the one responsible for trying to convert, back then they wanted to convert lead into gold. And the basis was really chemistry. So Dr. Samuel Hahnemann also did a lot of experiments using chemistry. And from reading all these old books and all these old reference materials, he came up with this principle, not that he came up with it, it was already existing, of like cures like. So it means, homeopathy means similar suffering. So what is similar suffering? Similar suffering means, here, let me take the next slide. If you take an onion and you cut an onion, what symptoms will you be experiencing if you cut up an onion? So you'll be experiencing teary eyes, you'll be experiencing phlegm in the nose, you'll be experiencing a lot of sneezing. So that's what happens when you cut up an onion. So in real life, what does this translate to? This translates into allergic rhinitis, the early stages of a cold. So allium cepa is actually a homeopathic remedy that is used for the common cold, and that's used for allergic rhinitis. So that's when he came up with the concept of like cures like. So if you see, there's a belladonna here, belladonna. Belladonna was what Shakespeare used to use in his writings. I think that's the one that Romeo and Juliet. That was the one used in Romeo and Juliet to commit suicide. So belladonna is deadly nightshade, and deadly nightshade. When the symptoms are, if you take it, first you get beginning inflammation, and then after beginning inflammation, you start to develop a high fever, and then from a high fever, you get convulsions, and then from convulsions, you eventually get seizures and you die. So that is a remedy that is used for very high fever, for early inflammation. You can use it for many stages of the pathology. It's used for early inflammation. It's used for very high fever. It's used for febrile seizures, the kind of seizures where when a child has a very high fever. It's also used for seizures. For dogs, epilepsy in dogs, it's a very effective remedy for epilepsy in dogs. And another example is stramonium. So what you're seeing here on the screen is datura. Stramonium is angel's trumpet. So here a lot of people use that to get high. Well, not a lot of people, but I know some people that have tried angel's trumpet to get high. So the effects are hallucinations, paranoia, delusions, illusions. So that is a remedy, when you potentize it, is used to treat mental illness. It's used to treat schizophrenia, bipolar, some forms of ADHD, etc. So in homeopathy, when we say like cures like, you get the symptoms of the poisoning of an item. Like allium cepa, the poisoning would be described as the phlegm condition, the teary-eyed, the sneezing, etc. And for belladonna, the poison symptoms would be first inflammation, ears, throat, everything would be inflamed. And then before you get fever, and then so on. So you match. So what Hahnemann did, because he worked in his father's pharmacy, is that he matched from his readings, he matched the poisoning symptoms or effects of the different pharmacological elements, and he matched it with the symptoms of people getting sick. So throughout his research here, so throughout it, maybe it took Hahnemann about 20 years. It's not something that happened overnight, but if you read a lot of the history, I cite a lot of the sources here. It would be interesting for you to click and read more about the life and the history of Hahnemann. He was actually very advanced. He was also a little bit like Galileo, and like on a verge of a genius, speaking 12 languages, always searching, to the point where he created an entire medical modality. Some people say, like in research, some people say that homeopathy actually dates even way back to the Egyptians. There are some hieroglyphics in the Egyptian caves that show the different principles of homeopathy. So all of this existed, but what Hahnemann did was he compiled it all into a body of work and into an actual field of study, a medical field of study. And homeopathy is actually older than what we now know as modern medicine, as allopathic medicine. It's older than that. It dates back to the 1800s, whereas pharmaceutical medicine evolved in the early 1900s. So here in his Materia Medica, he had about, I think, 28 original remedies that he researched on. And how they researched on all of these different remedies is similar to, it's probably even better than a double-blind study now. So what Hahnemann did was he would get a remedy, And then he would follow Paracelsus' formula of potentization. Later on, I will explain more on what potentization is. So how a homeopathic remedy differs from an herbal tincture is it goes through a process of potentization, meaning they dilute it and they pound it. They add a lot of kinetic force in succession until they have a very, very dilute substance. So he got his father-in-law's remedies from his father-in-law's pharmacy, and he potentized it. And what he did was he gave it to his colleagues and some of his students. And what they did was they would get a house, they would take the homeopathic remedy, and they would write down over the course of 1 month to 2 months all the symptoms. They were all well. To join this proving, you had to be a very healthy individual with no symptoms, no sickness. So a well person would take these remedies, and he wouldn't tell them which. And then over the course of the month, they would write down all their symptoms per day, and then he would collate it all, and then he would take all the top symptoms that everyone was feeling, and then that would be the keynote. Like for example, belladonna. Maybe he gave it to 20 people in different potencies over the course of 1 month. And out of the 20 people, everyone felt everyone got high fever. So the top keynote of belladonna would be high fever. For aconite, it would be worse from cold, any exposure to cold, and then they would suddenly develop some kind of inflammation. So that would be the top keynote of that particular remedy. Let me know, I'm looking at your questions. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, I'm just looking at the questions. No questions. Because sometimes I talk so fast and my mind goes everywhere. So if nothing is clear, if something is unclear, please let me know. So here, this was the body of work of Samuel Hahnemann. To come up with his first organon, it took him 20 years. And by the time he passed away at the age of 80 plus, he already had the sixth organon. And you can read this all for free on Vitulkas. I'll cite the website later on vitulkas.com. He has aphorisms. So his organon is broken down into paragraphs of aphorisms, and he explains all the principles of homeopathy in his organon. And then a separate book is the Materia Medica, where he takes most of the herbal medicine chest used at that time, herbal, and of course using metals and chemicals that they were using to treat people. He converted most of them into homeopathic remedies. So he became very popular. He was popular with the rich, he was popular with the intellectuals, he was popular with the royalty. And so what happens when you're popular? And he wasn't even, people were going to him instead of to the traditional allopathic doctors. People were buying from his pharmacy instead of from the traditional pharmacy. So what happens when you become very popular is people get jealous. So all of the doctors and pharmacists at that time banded together and wanted to get Hahnemann jailed. They wanted Hahnemann put in jail for disruption of business, for quackery. So even back then, for all the conspiracy theorists out there, medical conspiracy theorists, even back then in the 1800s, they were already very suspicious of people not practicing the traditional type of medicine. So on the eve of his arrest, this gentleman, this Duke Ferdinand of Cothen, which is a part in Germany, offered him a safe haven. Because back then there were still no countries. This was way before the war and way before the different European countries were even set up. This was actually the beginning of the delineation of all the European countries. So the Duke of Cothen offered him a safe haven in Anhalt, which is in Germany. So he was able to practice there very peacefully for many years. And he also, that's actually where his wife passed away. And this is interesting because Hahnemann's life should actually be a Netflix movie. So this very, very rich Parisian woman who was very close to the uh, Napoleon Bonaparte's Napoleon's family sought him out in Germany. She was a really big fan, and she fancied herself also as um, a doctor. She wasn't a doctor, but she was enamored with homeopathy. And right after Hahnemann's wife passed away, she went and she courted 80-year-old or 70-year-old Hahnemann. I'm not actually sure how old he was, but she was in her early 30s. Very young, very rich Parisian woman. So what happened was, during that time, there was a cholera epidemic. When Napoleon's army retreated from Russia, they all had cholera. So this lady, Marie, I think, Marie, she eventually married him and became Marie Hahnemann, took Dr. Samuel Hahnemann out of Cotton and brought him to Paris. And by then, they had already repealed the laws banning homeopathy because they were so desperate for a cure during I think it was the Asian cholera epidemic. They were very, very desperate for a cure. So they just said, okay, whoever can practice medicine, just help us, whether you're homeopathy or it didn't matter. So they actually repealed the laws to allow Hahnemann to go to Paris and practice. So Hahnemann treated Napoleon's army, the army that retreated into Paris, because his wife was very close to the Bonaparte family. And finally, Hahnemann became recognized in his late age. So the first, I would say, 40, 50 years of his career, he was, not that he wasn't recognized, but he was in exile. So he was recognized and put in exile. And then in his latter years, he actually became very, very, very popular. So he was one of the most popular doctors in all of Europe, and people would travel all around to see him. And there's a lot of statues of him now around Germany. There's statues of him in Washington, D.C. He's buried in the Père Lachaise cemetery next to Victor Hugo and all of these intellectuals and artists. So that was the life of Samuel Hahnemann, very colorful. And from his works, he had very many students from all over Europe. And so that started a diaspora of homeopathy around Europe and even into Central America, Asia, especially India, and other parts of the world. So here is, here, you should really actually check out the references that I put here in terms of the homeopathy and epidemics. Homeopathy has had a very, very high success rate for all kinds of epidemics versus allopathic medicine. So it's all cited here in the references. Anyway, this will all be posted on my page, so you can refer to this later. So still no questions. Okay, so I'm just checking out. Oh, here. Curious about your take on COVID-19. Okay, I will. Do you have a remedy to induce labor? Okay, COVID-19, yes, very, very effective now. We're using, depends on the stage. We're using, for preventive, arsenicum album. We're using ferrum phos, gelsemium, oscillocossinum. These are in the preventive stage. In the earlier stages of COVID, we're relying on belladonna, ferrum phos, gelsemium, oscillocossinum. In the later stages, when they develop a cough, we're using phosphorus. We're using bryonia for that dry cough. And for the late stages with the difficulty breathing, ICU, they already have a tube. We're using camphora and carboveg. So these are all the top remedies that we've been using for COVID. To induce labor, the one who sent me that message, just send me a private message for that one, because you have to be careful. There's quite a few remedies for that, but I prefer to discuss it in private. Okay, what is the difference between Chinese herbal meds and homeopathy? As I mentioned, Chinese herbal meds are herbal tinctures or tinctures of animal. And what homeopathy does is it takes it through a process of potentization, which I will explain later. Potentization is when you imbibe a lot of kinetic energy into the remedy. So actually, that's why I cited Nikola Tesla, is because a homeopathic remedy is an energy medicine. And I'll explain how it's done in a short while. Okay, no more questions. You know, if I actually miss your question, you'll just probably have to post it again. Hello, everyone. Everyone saying hello, hello, hello. Thank you for being here. Okay, so how did it spread? So it spread to the UK through Queen Adelaide. I think she was the wife of King William the fourth or the sixth. I get confused with the V1. So she was German, that married into the House of Windsor and brought with her a German homeopath. So ever since then, the House of Windsor has had their own homeopath. The Queen travels all around with her little remedy kit. She gives it even to her dogs and to her horses. And that's probably why they live to 100 plus years old. Prince Charles is also a very avid, you can Google Prince Charles homeopathy. Prince Charles is an avid supporter of homeopathic remedies. He's also supporting organic farming, etc. And this is much to the consternation of the pharmaceutical companies in Britain. They always give Prince Charles a lot of flack for his support of natural remedies. So it went to the UK. London has a lot of good homeopathic schools. They also have online courses that I'll cite later on. They have one of the best homeopathic pharmacies called Helios Pharmacy, which has all the remedies in the world that you can imagine, that you can just order and you can ship it here through shipping cart. So it spread to the UK. It also went to South America. There were a lot of Germans that migrated to Brazil, Cuba, and South America. And Francisco Aiziaga is one of the most, he's the most popular homeopath, modern day homeopath, because he refined a lot of the principles. And what he was known for was homeopathic prophylaxis. So homeopathic prophylaxis is when you inoculate a large group of people with a homeopathic remedy to stimulate their immune system for that particular epidemic. Like when there was a measles epidemic, they would inoculate children in Argentina, Cuba, and Brazil. 60,000 just through, so it was through their health ministry that they would do that. They would inoculate 60,000 people with a measles, homeopathic measles vaccine. I would have to use that in quotation marks because it's nothing like our traditional vaccine, and I'll explain the difference again later. So they were doing this a lot, of course, until a lot of the pharmaceutical companies penetrated these areas, because we're talking about in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Cuba is still practicing it until now, and now their ministry is dispensing a homeopathic called Rehongavir or something like that now for COVID-12. And I was looking at it, it's just a compound of many different homeopathic remedy mixes. You know, they just dump everything in there and hope for the best. And that works if you're only stimulating the immune system. So Cuba now is prophylactically inoculating their citizens with homeopathic remedies. Okay, so here we have the Banerjee family. So Prasanta Banerjee and Pratip Banerjee. Prasanta Banerjee passed away maybe 2 years ago, which is too bad because before he passed away, he was supposed to come here to the Philippines. And then he passed away. He must have been in his late 80s, early 90s already. So his son Pratip Banerjee, what they've done is they've collated almost 150 years, because it was their great-great-grandfather that was a student of the student of Dr. Hahnemann. So they got all the medical records of 150 years worth of medical records. And what they did was they got the top 3 to 6 remedies for each condition. Like for example, if it's eczema, this is the first line protocol, second line protocol, third line protocol. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of prescribing homeopathic remedies. For me, there's some that work and there's some that don't work. It definitely, I've tried the COVID, the Banerjee protocol for COVID for a couple of people, and it seems to have worked. One was symptomatic, test came out negative. The other two were not symptomatic, but they were doing it just as prevention. So what we're after is just really stimulating the immune system and the vital force. You're not actually, when you're using homeopathy for prevention, you're not actually looking for the cure as much as you just want to jumpstart the immune cells to work so that when the pathogen enters, it's able to eliminate it properly. So you can just email this, their institute, the Banerjee Institute in India, and they will answer you within a week with the appropriate protocol, whether it's for, they have protocols for everything under the sun, from gangrene to liver cirrhosis, even cancers. And on their website, they cite a lot of successful studies with homeopathy and certain cancers. Okay. Is there a homeopathic remedy for COVID-19 induced cytokine storms? Yes. That's when we start to use camphor, carbo-veg. That's to open up the lungs, because when a cytokine storm comes, it just gets flooded with phlegm and inflammation, and it coats everything from the throat to the bronchioles where they can't breathe. And another one that they've tried also is China, which is homeopathic quinine. And I know now hydrochloroquinone is controversial. Does it work? Doesn't it? It doesn't work. Does it work for COVID? Well, there's a homeopathic version for quinine, which is Cinchona officinalis, or what's known as China. So I haven't actually had anyone yet in that stage. I've had some people that have been already on oxygen, but not yet intubated. And what got them out of ICU and out of the hospital was camphor and carbo-veg. Okay, Bell's palsy. Is there any good study? Bell's palsy. Yes, many remedies for Bell's palsy. Gelsemium, belladonna is also a remedy for Bell's palsy. Causticum. There's quite a few remedies for Bell's palsy. Okay. Oh, so here now we get into the controversy of, what I would say would be the downfall of homeopathy. So homeopathy became so popular in the New World. A lot of the Germans and the British homeopaths migrated to the United States in the late 1800s and set up the American Homeopathic Association. And the American Homeopathic Association was actually set up 5 years before the American Medical Association. It came 5 years before. And a lot of the original homeopaths were medical doctors. In fact, you could only become a homeopath in the United States if you were a medical doctor. And one of the supporters of homeopathy was J.D. Rockefeller, or John D. Rockefeller, which is ironic because he was both the biggest supporter and the reason for the downfall of homeopathy. So the American Homeopathic Association and the American Medical Association started to compete over the grant. So before Rockefeller died, he left a huge grant for homeopathy. But he had this assistant, and his name is, I forget, but I know the family name was Gates. Something Gates. It's in the, you can cite one of the references in the next page. Teamed up with the Carnegie Foundation, and they decided that they would give the money to the American Medical Association instead of the American Homeopathic Association. So that's when there started to be a clash between the two organizations. So the American Medical Association actually banned their members from practicing homeopathy. And there started the decline of homeopathy in the United States. There must have been 30 or more homeopathic hospitals in the United States, and a lot of the present-day medical hospitals used to be homeopathic hospitals like the University of Michigan, the New York Flower Hospital. A few of the University of California campuses were also homeopathic hospitals until this grant of the Carnegie Foundation came. And what they did was they appointed this guy, Flexner, okay, this Flexner, Abraham Flexner, to audit each hospital and see whether or not they were qualified to receive some grant money. So Flexner was part of the Carnegie Foundation, which was at that time, this was the beginning of the industrial age and the oil boom, and they had just started to make pharmaceutical medicine out of petroleum. So all the medicine that you're buying now in Mercury Drug is made out of petroleum. Even the ones that are supposed to be plant derived. So in a way, like for example, let's take vincristine. Vincristine is a chemotherapy drug being used right now. And instead of using the actual vincristine from the vinca plant, which is a plant that grows everywhere. Here in Merville, there's so much of the vinca plant. You can't patent it and sell it. So they made a synthetic version of the vinca plant and called it vincristine. And so on and so forth, because natural plants can't be patented. And when you take a carbon molecule from petroleum, you can make anything from plastic to all kinds of materials, including medicine, including pharmaceuticals. And you can copy any kind of normal, any kind of natural active ingredient and make the chemical version. So that's basically what's happening now. Let me just check. What's a cheerful remedy? Okay, well, I don't know what's a cheerful remedy, but we were giving actually arsenicum album for those that are feeling stressed and anxious and have insomnia from this COVID, fear of those with slight hypochondria, etc. What can we take as homeopathic prophylaxis for COVID? I will actually write it in the comments later, the prophylaxis, because I've already mentioned it a few times. Okay. So where were we? Okay, so when the Flexner report came out, one by one, the homeopathic schools started closing until by the 1920s, there were no more homeopathic schools. And even the ones in the big universities were also forced to close because they all wanted part of the grant of the Carnegie Foundation. And the Rockefeller and the Carnegie Foundation were partnered at that time. So you can actually go to this reference that I've cited here and read the very colorful history, which for me should actually be a Netflix miniseries. Okay, so let's go to the principles of homeopathy. Let me just check the time. Oh, it's only 3:30. So what are the principles of homeopathy? So I already mentioned simila, similibus curantur, or like cures like. And for those that have just logged on now, is the principle of like cures like was actually used by the ancient Chinese, by the Mayans, by the Egyptians, Ayurveda, all the very old medical traditions were using like cures like. And one of this is to match the symptom of the person with a symptom of a substance that causes the same reaction. So I cited onion. When you cut an onion, you start to tear, you have phlegm coming out of your nose, you start to sneeze sometimes. And so homeopathic onion is the same, is the remedy that they use for allergic rhinitis and the common cold. Stramonium, or angel's trumpet, datura, which makes some people, which makes people hallucinate. It's a psychedelic substance, so it makes people have delusions, illusions, paranoia. They imagine things. So that is a remedy that we use for schizophrenia, some bipolar conditions, and for anyone experiencing And you can even antidote somebody that has taken stramonium and they want to antidote their stramonium. They can actually take homeopathic stramonium. Another principle of homeopathy is the concept of life force energy or prana. So this is also being used by Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, etc. All the ancient medical traditions use prana. So all of us have a life force energy running through us, and this begins at the moment of conception. When the sperm and the egg meet, it creates this life force energy that starts the human being. So it goes to show that both the male and the female also have a life force energy that they impart onto the egg and onto the fetus. So this is known as the vital force, the dynamic energy, the dynamis. There's many different names for it, but without it, we would just be a bundle of bones and flesh on the floor. We wouldn't actually be this animated person with emotions, with thoughts, with feelings, you know. And vital force also refers to the level of energy and vitality that one has. The more vital you are, the more your vital force is high, the healthier you are, the more you can withstand all kinds of um, environmental assault. And that can be from the air, that can be from the food, that can be from pathogens, bacteria, virus, radiation, 3G, 5G, 4G, etc. So the higher your vital force, the higher your ability to withstand. And I can't emphasize this enough with what's going on right now, is that we need to shift the focus from hiding into focusing on increasing people's vital force. We can't hide forever. You know what I mean? I'm enjoying the lockdown. It's given me time to write and to research and to do all of these things and to garden, but it's not a permanent solution. And instead, we should actually allow people's vital force to come and work, and for the immune system to start working. Okay, so this is a Kirlian photograph of. Some people can say that it's the aura, but you know, it's more than the aura, the vital force. It's because we are actually electrical beings. Electrical currents are run through us, and this is proven through EEG, EMG, EKG. So we can actually pick up electrical impulses from different parts of the body. You know, from a conventional medical point of view, these are the machines we use. And from a non-conventional point of view, there's all kinds of machines that you can buy from Germany and Russia that will measure, you know, I forget their names, but you know, you hold on and it can measure actually the electrical currents running through even your different organs and even how big your energy field is. I really want one, but they're really expensive. It's like $16,000 for one of those. So, okay, please explain sorry, there's a question. Oh, please explain the potencies. Yes, I will explain the potencies later. So I'm just explaining about the vital force because this is quite important. So electrical currents actually run through us. So this is the vital force. And if your EKG is off, if your EMG is off, you know that line that shows whether you're alive or dead? If you flatline, 0. That's no more vital force, right? So this should actually be the core of all medicine, is we should be in the business of treating the vital force rather than treating individual organs. Because what's happening now is there's so many specialists, and I'm not belittling the specialists, but you know, a specialist focuses on the liver, gives all kinds of medication on the liver, and is not really communicating with the other doctors. And then we have all of these medications that are counteracting each other and that are ruining the liver to begin with and the kidney because it has a hard time cleaning out the body. And we get all kinds of complications because of all these different pharmaceutical medicines that are not in sync. I'm there is a time and there is a place for pharmaceutical medicine. I'm not dissing it. My dad is a medical doctor. My education was probably paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. So it's just there is a time and a place, and it is not the answer for everything. Yes, definitely, there's a time to use steroids. It's when you're steroids is very successful even in certain COVID situations. During a cytokine storm, you can use a steroid and that will calm it down. During dengue, you can also use a steroid. Now, some people are anti and pro steroids, even in the medical profession. But my dad's like king steroids, so I know a lot about steroids too. Okay, so where was I? So yes, we should just use pharmaceutical medicine very, very cautiously, because what can happen, and I'll explain later, is that we make our immune system lazy. It stops working. For example, all of these vaccine, and I'm not going to get into the vaccine argument because at the end of the day, it's free choice. If you want to go have a vaccine, go ahead. I personally won't, but I will cite the reasons why later, because I've experienced firsthand vaccine injury, and I've seen a lot of vaccine injury too. But if you're gonna go vaccinate, that's your choice, right? So not even, but what happens is when you get too much vaccination, your immune system gets confused. It has all of these interferon, interleukins, and I don't know the exact words, but every time it gets a vaccine, it expresses some kind of reaction to counteract, let's say, measles. But when it's too much, it gets confused, and that's why we're seeing a lot of autoimmune conditions nowadays. It's almost 4 out of 10 in some industrialized countries, mind you. In the countries that are highly vaccinated, we're seeing 6 out of 10 people with autoimmune conditions, and that ranges from diabetes to asthma to thyroid. We almost a lot of women that enter menopause also have conjuncthyroid issues. And so many new kinds of autoimmune conditions is because instead of allowing our body to work, we're just giving it something that does the work for them. So when it really needs to work, it doesn't know how anymore. It's not like when we were kids. It's also another reason why our immune system is so low. It's also we're overprotecting the kids. When we were kids, we were allowed to play in the gutter and catch guppies in the gutter and play in the mud. So all of these are beneficial microorganisms that benefit our gut biome, and our immunity is regulated by our gut health. And because we're always sanitizing and not allowing our kids to get sick and giving them 50 vaccinations against everything, the body is not anymore capable of doing its own work. And another thing also about third generation, fourth generation antibiotics and all of that is it allows the virus to mutate. So we're running against nature here, and man thinks it's better than nature when nature is nature. It's infinite. So the virus will always find ways of mutating. I hear now that there's 30 strains because also people are treating it 30 different ways. So of course, in every place that it goes to, based on the local conditions, it's going to mutate into a different strain. So we should allow our kids to play in the dirt. We should allow them to get sick. The reason why we're secreting mucus is to get rid of pathogens, is to get rid of things that are in our mucous membrane. The reason why we have diarrhea is to get rid of toxins. The reason why we have high fever is to also allow our body heat to break down the bacteria and the virus through a higher temperature. I mean, there's a fine line between allowing your kids to get sick and making them sick to the point that they're ill. But, it's like at the slightest sign of anything, we already suppress with medication. Even if my dad was a doctor, we were not really given that much medication. We were actually even sent to somebody's house We were sent to chickenpox parties, mumps parties, measles parties, because back then they wanted you to get everything. But because we had such strong immunity because of my dad who would bring home the pathogen every day, we must have gone to about 30 different kinds of get sick parties. Well, it's just you going to your friend's house or your cousin's house. And none of us actually contracted. I finally got chicken pox when I was in college. And it was quite mild, actually. Okay, so we are electrical beings. So to go back to idea weight. So here's just to show you vital force. So here's the law of electromagnetism. And I just want to show you that one of the reasons, and this is one of the theories of homeopathy, is that all of these homeopathic remedies, which come from tinctures, herbal tinctures, chemical tinctures, tinctures made out of animal parts, it's potentized, so it's given energy, and it emits a certain, so the active ingredient that causes somebody to get poisoned emits a certain kind of electromagnetic pattern. Let's say it's got this certain pattern and the pattern is the symptoms that you see being manifested, the sneezing, the tearing, the clear phlegm coming out from the nose is the pattern that is given out by the onion, the active ingredient of onion. And what's happening in the sick individual that's exhibiting the same symptoms is most likely because we are electrical beings emitting the same kind of pattern. Therefore, you add two fields. So one is probably a positive, the other one is probably a negative, or one is a polar opposite of the other. So it actually locks like a key. And that is why homeopathic remedies work when you match the symptoms as close as possible. So that is a theory being presented, because right now there is no equipment that can actually measure vibration. Science is only now coming into quantum physics and creating instruments that are able to measure wave particles and vibration. So it's these two kinds of patterns that are locking in, and it negates each other. That's how it's able to make the symptoms disappear. So if you have any questions about that, I don't know if that is a good analogy or a good explanation, but if you have any questions about that, do let me know. Okay. What remedy to detox from vaccines? There's quite a bit. Thuja is one of them. Hypericum also depends on what stage you want to, what stage of the injury. You can detox it right after you get the vaccine, or once they start to manifest different symptoms. And I'll talk more on that about later when we talk about tautopathy, isopathy, and other fields of homeopathy. Okay. Okay. So yes, to go back, the science behind homeopathy. What? There's a science behind homeopathy? I thought it was just all quackery. If you Google homeopathy, it just disses it. Wikipedia is probably the worst place to look and read about homeopathy. It just says it's quackery. And they're probably right, because there is no way to actually check if a homeopathic remedy has any active ingredient. I'll give you some samples. These are samples of homeopathic remedies. And if you put it under, this is a homeopathic remedy. If you put them under a microscope, you will not see anything of the active ingredient of belladonna or of allium cepa, of the onion, or of anything that has an active ingredient. What you're only going to see are the active ingredients of water and alcohol, which is this remedy, or the crystal structure of sugar, which is in this remedy. They're not going to be able to see the active ingredients of let's say here, Cephalandra indica, which is a plant. There's going to be none of that because it's already so diluted. And that's why a lot of people can dismiss homeopathy very, very, very easily. Have most of you heard about CERN? Okay, CERN is this place in Switzerland. It's this, they built this massive thing called the Hadron Collider that they wanted to, or they have successfully broken down the hydrogen atom. So they built this massive thing. Look at that tiny little guy there. That's a tiny little guy. And this thing goes on for miles on either side, exerting so much force to be able to break down a hydrogen atom. And they wanted this to prove the Big Bang, how the world began. What was that first element? H is the first element in the periodic table. So if they break that down, that must have been the way the universe started. And they were successful in breaking down. So if we went to school and we know the hydrogen atom to be composed of proton, neutron, and electron, it was right back then. But now you can actually break down the electron and the other elements of an atom into smaller bits. So here it's the Higgs boson particle. What's smaller than an electron is actually not the smallest element anymore, like what we thought when we were grade school. But now it's the particle, and there's so many particles. There's endless names. Higgs boson is actually also known as the God particle because, they thought they would be able to debunk that the infinite creation of the universe, that the universe was created by an infinite intelligence. But when they did break it down, even more mysteries came up, and that's why they call it the God particle, because it even brought up more questions rather than answers. But here they named it out of the two scientists that discovered the particle. So homeopathy actually is in the realm of quantum and nanophysics. And I will explain why, because how do you make a homeopathic remedy? Okay, here's how you make a homeopathic remedy. Here you see the mother tincture, right, on my slide. Let's say this is the mother tincture. I've diluted some, let's say onion, since we're using onion as an example. I crush some onion. I put onion in a tincture of vodka. I've let it sit so that the active ingredient of the onion is diluted into the vodka. And then to make a homeopathic remedy, and here this answers the question of how it differs from herbal and Chinese tinctures, is you get 1 part, or let's say 10 ml of the active ingredient, and you put it in 90 ml of water, and then you close it, and then you pound it. You pound it 100 times. Well, actually here I'm just doing it by hand, but back then they have machines. Now they have machines, like the homeopathic pharmacies have machines already that will pound it for you. So you pound it 100 times, and that becomes 1 CH, meaning 1 centesimal. Diluted ones, pounded 100 times, centesimal. And then to make 2C, and there was a question of differentiating 6C, 30C, 200CH. To make 2C, you get another 10 ml, put it in a bottle with 990 ml water, close it, and then you pound it again 100 times. So what's happening here is that you're exerting a lot of kinetic energy into the bottle. So energy is neither created nor destroyed. It must go somewhere. So what's happening is it's going into the inner bonds of the active ingredient. That's why the higher the potency, the stronger it is because the bonds of the particles are getting stronger with every succussion. So what was happening is this action is acting like CERN. Instead of having that huge machine to break down the hydrogen atom, the force of the pounding is actually breaking down the atom of the active ingredient. So on and so forth until you reach 6C, means it's been diluted 6 times and pounded 600 times. 30C means it's been diluted 30 times and pounded 30 times, 30,000 times. And 200C means it's been diluted 200 times and pounded 20,000 times. So imagine the amount of kinetic energy that's gone into that kind of remedy. And so there's also this Avogadro's number, Avogadro's number is all those decimals, tiny decimals. So when it gets past the sixth dilution, it's so tiny that it actually goes into Avogadro's number. It doesn't mean it disappears, and that's what Avogadro's principle is. It's just ultra in math. It's still there, but it's 0.000000000000000 blah 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 blah. Right? So if you have any questions about potentization, because this is so important, and this is actually what debunks a lot of people that are saying that homeopathic remedies are all quackery. Wait, does this mean, since it's also energy, does this mean they use organic onion in making homeopathic remedies? Well, most of these remedies are already really, so these remedies, because it's energetic, the beauty about it is you can graft it. So what happens is, if I wanted to graft this energetic remedy, I would just have to take a small part, put it in another glass of bottle of water with a little vodka so it doesn't spoil, pound it a couple of times, and I've grafted the energy of the previous remedy. And this is what makes homeopathy also so threatening to pharmaceutical companies, is one kit like this will last a lifetime. This is a kit of 100 remedies, right? From one of this, I can make one of this. I mean, I'm not even going to use this whole thing. I'm only going to use like 3 or 4 pellets of this. I can make one of this. And then from one of this, I can make 100 of this and 1,000 of this. In fact, you don't even ever have to buy a homeopathic remedy again. That's why companies sell it as sugar pills, so it actually eventually runs out. But you can convert your sugar pills into a master remedy with vodka and make it last forever. So it's really open source medicine. That's why it's quite threatening. And not only is it open source, there are remedies that can match head to head a lot of the pharmaceutical remedies out there, because since it's vibrational, it passes through the blood-brain barrier very easily. And it also goes through the cells very easily because it works, like how I explained to you in that electromagnetic. It's matching the patterns very easily. And it finds it very easily, so it works. If it's the right remedy, it works quite fast. So this is the principles of making a homeopathic remedy. So the remedies, to answer that remedy about organic onion, back then they probably used organic onion because we're still using the remedies from the time of Hahnemann. A lot of these remedies that we're grafting now are still from those days, right? So yeah, most likely it's still, and even for the vegetarians there, it's like, oh my gosh, how can I take a homeopathic sepia, which is squid ink? This is also from way back when, and I know a lot of vegans and vegetarians that are so into homeopathy, because maybe originally an animal was harmed, but it's done its contribution to mankind already with the amount of remedies you've been able to graft from that original one. So here are Kirlian photographs of homeopathic remedies. You can see the energy of the different drops of homeopathic remedies. What's interesting, I think, is the first one is hand succussed, meaning hand pounded. Seems to be more energetic than the ones that are machine pounded. Okay. Are you guys, I still have about 30 minutes, I hope you guys are still with me. So types of remedies. So we have liquid form. So these are usually in some kind of alcohol base so that the water does not grow microorganisms. We have the sugar pill form, which is just sugar pills where they've dropped a little bit of the alcohol and shaken it, because sugar is a crystal form. So homeopathic remedies can pass through crystal forms. Water is a crystal. So it's not so much water memory as much as it is vibration that is hanging onto crystals. And crystals hold energy. Like look at your quartz watch. It's got its own energy and it makes watches run. So here are types of homeopathic remedies. I'll just go through this quickly. There's arnica. This has already crossed over into conventional medicine. good for injuries, good for hemorrhaging, trauma, blunt trauma. We have calendula, good for wounds. Ignatia, this is an interesting remedy because Ignatia is actually a homeopathic remedy that originated in the Philippines. So what happened was in the 1600s, when the Ignatian priests came to the Philippines, they made a tincture out of this Ignatia, and they brought it back to Europe, and Hahnemann potentized it. So it's known as Ignatia, and this is a remedy for grief. It's for shock. It's for some forms of depression. So actually, when somebody reads the characteristics or the constitutional description of Ignatia, it reminds him a lot of Ignatians, very stoic and very... Anyway, you can read more about the constitution of Ignatia. So of course, aside from plants, minerals, chemical compounds, they are all homeopathic remedies. Baking soda is a homeopathic remedy. Borax is a homeopathic remedy. Um, all of the elements, I would say maybe half the periodic table is also homeopathic remedies. Although we don't use all, we don't really need all. So compounds are arsenic. This is what we're using now for COVID prophylaxis. So also animal secretions and parts are used as homeopathic remedies. So here we're looking at things with very strong reactions, right? So if you get bitten by a snake, this is a South American type of snake where when it bites you, first you start to hemorrhage slowly, and then your blood starts to get black, and then you seize, and then you die. So Lachesis muta is a remedy for the hemorrhaging fevers. It's a very good remedy for late stage dengue. It's also, but it's not just for that, it's helpful for those kinds of remedies. But when they were proving it, meaning when Hahnemann was testing this remedy on his students and his colleagues, over the month, they also wrote that it was good for heat stroke. It's also good for, I used this for a dog that was having tonic-clonic seizures from overheating. And this was the remedy that was used. It's also it's also a women's remedy for PMS, menopause. It's actually one of the more, we would say, some remedies in the homeopathic materia medica have what they call constitutions or descriptions, and like a personality associated with it. And Lachesis muta is one of the most malicious remedies. So they associate it with women who are not normally like that, but when they do get hormonal surges, they become vindictive, vicious, irritable, angry, loquacious, etc. So this comes out, in their personality. And Lachesis muta is a very good remedy for that kind of PMS or menopause. Sepia, squid ink, paella negra is a good remedy also for menopause. This is for the postpartum depression, menopause, when you're overwhelmed, overburdened, you want to kill your children, and some people actually do. Puppies eat their dogs. Puppies eat their dogs, eat their puppies. For that kind of vicious type of postpartum, squid ink is a good remedy. Okay, so here we go to the different types of homeopathy. Okay, we still have time. Okay, 4 p.m. We'll probably have about 20 more minutes. So classical homeopathy is what I practice, and this is exactly in the tradition of Samuel Hahnemann, following his organon, not the 6th organon, but the earlier organons. So this is usually using one remedy at a time. Classical homeopaths don't tend to mix different remedies together. Clinical homeopathy and complex homeopathy can be a form of homeopathy where they mix different kinds of remedies together, as long as you know that they don't contraindicate each other. You can use them together. Clinical homeopathy can also be known as differential prescribing, meaning you're not anymore going to get the whole picture of the patient, because to a homeopathic consultation, if you were going to study all of the modalities, we actually even ask how a person is sleeping, how they're thinking, what they're eating, if they feel hot, cold, what side of the bed they sleep on, how many pillows they need, do they feel better standing, sitting, so many generals and so many modalities in classical homeopathy that it becomes quite tedious to take a whole case. So in clinical homeopathy, we're just going to get your top clinical symptoms for your acute, and then we'll prescribe based on your acute symptoms. So this is very good for the epidemics, for acute issues, but for chronic cases, we still tend to go into the classical type of homeopathy. Homeotoxicology is using homeopathic remedies to detox, like what somebody was asking earlier, how do you detox vaccine injury? So that's a whole study in itself. Isopathy and autoisopathy is because it's like cures like. You can actually use diseased tissue to treat yourself. Like, for example, medurinum. That is a homeopathic remedy made out of gonorrhea. There's medurinum, there's tuberculinum made out of tuberculosis sputum. There is carcinosin made out of cancer tumors. So the concept here is like cures like. You potentize the homeopathic, the diseased tissue to the point where, of course, it no longer exists as a diseased tissue, and that you can use it back into stimulating your immune system. Okay, so no more questions. There's a few questions, but it's already going into the prescribing. So I'll answer those later. So diseased tissues, autoisopathy, I think is now also, I was just discussing it with a friend, that for COVID, you can actually treat yourself by potentizing your own sputum or your own urine. Making it into a homeopathic remedy, as I showed you, 1 drop into 99 drops, pounding it 100 times, so on and so forth, and then taking that back. A lot of people do the urine therapy and they just drink it straight, and that also seems to help some certain conditions. So that's what autoisopathy is using your own diseased tissue or your own tissues. Homeopathic cell salts. So homeopathic cell salts are all the elements in our body after cremation. So they cremate a body and then they analyzed what are all the elements left, and they came up with 12 different cell salts, which are there's silica there's calcarea carbonica, there's magnesium phosphate, there's 12 of them. And so that you can take it to, and actually for me, homeopathic cell salts are more like homeopathic vitamins. So you can take it on a daily basis. It's good for cell integrity. So it actually keeps you young because it keeps your cells saturated, it doesn't dry up. And that's how people age, is when their skin's dried up because their cell integrity is not good. Anthroposophic homeopathy, which is what the Waldorf moms practice. The Banerjee protocols that I mentioned earlier from the Banerjee clinic. And of course, many more. Okay, so levels of health. So this is almost the end of our discussion, and this is actually quite important in the light of what's going on now. And I'll explain why homeopathy and boosting your immune system is all the more important now, more than ever. So I mentioned earlier that we have a vital force. So the Chinese have broken it down even more into different kinds of energetic force fields, So if we have our own vital force, we have what they call Wei Qi, which is like your force field around you that protects you from all the elements outside. That's why some people, there's a level of susceptibility. Some people are more susceptible to COVID and some are not as susceptible to COVID. Some people are more susceptible to rain and they get sick the minute they walk out into the rain, and some aren't. So everyone has a level of susceptibility based on their Wei Qi, which is based on other energy patterns. So here we have the relationships. So basically, we humans, not only are we made out of electricity and we're the body electric, is we're energy machines. We take energy from outside and we convert it. We take energy from the food, we take energy from water, we take energy from air we breathe, we take energy from people around us. We absorb all of these energies. And if our own energy, our own vital force is not strong, we can get depressed from other people's energy. We can get sick from eating the energy of that energy of food. We can develop some kind of ADHD from all of the EMF and radioactive um, things around us, right? So we have what we call our innate or our true chi, our true energy, which is our immunity, which is how well our channels are flowing. So another way to keep healthy is make sure all your channels of elimination are working. Your skin you're able to sweat, you're pooping properly, peeing properly, sweating properly, digesting properly, you don't have GERD, you don't have, so you're able to convert all of this. Your mind is clear, so you're able to convert the energy that you're absorbing from other people. All of these channels are clear, that you're able to take all these outside energy, convert it into a healthy body. So the kidneys, the liver, all of these channels should be working very, very efficiently for a good immune system. Okay, so then we develop a very strong force field or wei qi around us that makes us less susceptible to pathogens, viruses, and so on. Okay, next slide. So we have layers of disease. So to talk about constitution is most people are born with very healthy constitutions. What we call a calcarea carbonica child. Calcarea carbonica is a homeopathic remedy that signifies a fat, chubby, sweaty child. They're always sweating in the back of their neck, even in aircon, they're sweating. They love milk, they love sweet things. They're a little slow to run in school. They like to take on responsibility. Those are very healthy children. They're not scrawny, skinny. So the general population is pretty much a calcarea carbonica or its thinner version, calcarea phosphorica child. And then what happens is the first, they may get vaccinated, and then after the vaccination, they develop a fever, and then the fever is suppressed with an antipyretic. So what happens when you suppress is that it doesn't disappear, it just goes deeper into the body. So if your constitution is not so good and your genetics is not so good, meaning you come from a line, a genetic line that's already inherently sick, and in homeopathy we call that having a miasm in the family, meaning your ancestor survived tuberculosis or survived gonorrhea and was still able to procreate, thereby the DNA coming from that line was already sick. Then your tendency of acquiring a disease is higher, and then instead of allowing the body to get rid of it naturally through herbs, through food, through homeopathic remedies, through naturopathy, we suppress it with steroids and antipyretics. It goes in, so then the child will probably develop a asthma, or it'll develop a skin condition, and then we suppress it again with steroids. And then so what happens is it enters in Chinese medicine, the skin is connected to the lungs. It's one big organ. If we go in, our skin goes into our stomach, out it's like, our throat to our rectum is just one big skin. It goes in and they usually develop asthma. So we see a lot of skin asthma and a lot of asthma connected together. So this becomes the healthy child, and then the first layer, which is the sickness that they caught. And then the second layer is the suppression of it. And then because they're already in this state, they're on Montelukast and nebulizers and salbutamol and never-ending rounds of antibiotics. That's another layer. And then, so if the child originally had this very bright vital force, each layer is a net. So there's still vital force that's able to shine through, but the more trauma, the parents separated, or the child got into a traumatic accident, that's another net and another net and another net, to the point where by the time you develop an autoimmune disease or cancer or a chronic disease is that your layers, your original vital force is already so covered up by all of these different layers. That's why we always take a timeline in homeopathic consultations. And we can actually, in the timeline, see from where they've never been well. And, being a homeopath, I always see that the beginning, children who are unwell probably have inherited it. That's a very big factor. Conditions of their mother's pregnancy also. Were they taking something to keep the pregnancy? Did they have such a bad morning sickness that they were malnourished? The genetics of the family, if they, the condition of the parents when they were conceived, was the dad drunk? Was the mom sick? That all matters when our original vital force is begun. And then you see also if they've had a very heavy vaccine schedule, that's when you'll see that the asthma has started. So in terms of vaccination, not everyone, see, it's not that everyone develops autism from a vaccination. There is a level of susceptibility from, let's say, 1 to 100. You'd say the first 10 children, no effect, very good genes, very healthy. So almost nothing. Maybe then the next 20 to 30 would be they developed a high fever after the vaccine. And then so now they have a tendency to get cough and colds often because they're very sensitive to rain. And when it rains, they get sick. And then the next level of susceptibility is they develop a chronic asthma, chronic rhinitis, chronic eczema, or some kind of chronic issue. And then we see in the last 10%, last 5% is where we see the autism and the severe neurological conditions caused by a vaccine. So this is just one vaccine, and multiply that by the vaccine schedule, right? How many times are you assaulting the vital force of the person? So if you want to analyze why you or any of your family members have chronic illnesses, is to make a timeline of your disease even from pregnancy, from the family history, from all the vaccinations, all the traumas you've suffered, and then you will begin to see in the timeline, never been well since, never been well since. So in chronic homeopathic prescribing, we always prescribe through some remedies that release, always the last layer, and that's why also a lot of people that suffer and don't make it from COVID have comorbidities, is because you can already imagine that their the net around their vital force is already like a rock, right? There's barely any vital force. They're just being kept together by their maintenance meds practically. No more vital force, so to speak. And so that's how they succumb so easily to the pandemic. So that's the level of susceptibility and resistance. Okay, also layer of disease is the law of entropy. We're not beings that are meant to last and live forever, right? Although in homeopathy, there's also no reason why you should keep your vital force healthy. Also in Chinese medicine, there's no reason why you should age. But eventually, things must come to an end, right? We don't live forever. So there's the law of entropy, there's susceptibility, and why some people are more susceptible, why some people are more resistant. During their lifetime, maybe they were fed better, they were not fed junk food, they were raised on a healthy diet, happy family, etc., and so on. You can also raise your kids the same way, and one will be a drug addict and one won't. I mean, it's how do you differentiate that? Everyone is in a different level of susceptibility and a different constitution. And of course, you have your desires, aspirations, and attachments. So meaning, if I desire pork barbecue and lechon kawale for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, bacon on everything I eat, or if I aspire to become a CEO at the expense of going home, eating well, and sleeping well, then I will develop a disease. So it's what we aspire for, it's what we desire, it's what we're attached to. We desire alcohol, we desire certain drugs, we're attached to certain things. Then we can also develop a layer of disease. Also beliefs, like some people only believe that allopathic conventional medicine is the way, and they'll take they're probably on 20 different kinds of meds, and then they develop nausea because they're on 20 different meds, and they're given meds for the nausea. They're like that because of their belief in that kind of medicine. You know, the people that believe in traditional medicines have a certain level of health. I'm just giving examples here. I'm not out to this conventional medicine, although everything's always like a backhanded insult. And of course, force majeure. I can walk out of here and get hit by a car, dead ball, and game. Okay, so this is how the different layers of diseases are created in the body and why we're more susceptible. Okay, so here, forces that affect our vital energy. So we have genetics and miasms, like I was saying earlier. We have physical trauma and adhesions. A lot of people don't know, but adhesions can also cause certain issues and ailments. Like you can get hit by a ball or kicked and develop a small lump, and then that can grow into cancer. So trauma, adhesions, excess radio frequencies, we're seeing a lot of that now, 4G, 3G, Wi-Fi, all of these things. 5G, obesity, also oxidative stress, mental stress, trauma, insomnia also affects our vital force. Chronic inflammation, well, all of this causes chronic inflammation. Sedentary lifestyle, weakened immunity, toxicity, acidity, environmental toxins, smoking, etc., etc. So we just have to be mindful about just think of yourself as an energy machine. What am I taking in that is being converted into my life? Everything I'm taking in, I'm converting it into my life, right? Let me just check the messages. Yes, there are many remedies. Okay, so here now we get to cases. I'll show you some cases. Okay, guys, I should have warned you. Sorry. For those that are really sensitive, please close your eyes at this point, because what I'm going to show you is going to be really, really traumatic. Close your eyes. Okay, so for those that want to see an open wound, I just wanted to show you this open wound. The rest, you can close your eyes. Okay, so this is my dad. He hurt himself during lockdown and we didn't want to bring him to the hospital. So my dad's a 90-year-old pediatrician. He's on a lot of homeopathy, and that's keeping him very healthy at 90 despite major surgery. So we did not want to bring him to the hospital. We only treated him homeopathically for the injury. He injured his shoulder. We gave him arnica for that. And also because we didn't want to mix so many homeopathic remedies at the same time, we opted to spray his wound and give him orally the other homeopathic remedies for his injury, because he fell in the bathroom and scraped his hand against the bidet. So this is in a month almost, or less than a month, from that open wound to what's now scabbing here, April 20, right? So homeopathic remedies are very, very powerful in emergency situations. There's for drowning, there's for bee stings, there's for when your throat closes, there is for all kinds of emergency hemorrhage, blunt force trauma, etc. It's important to have a kit lying around. Okay, we have here urticaria. So here, this was within 24 hours, bitten by, see all those dots? I think she took urticurins for urticaria. And then here we have, so here, this is why I personally would not vaccinate. I'm not a mom, but I am a dog parent. And this is my dog who was vaccinated with 5-in-1 and rabies at the same day. And it was my dad who figured out that it was vaccine injury when he was looking at her timeline. 3 days after, she developed twitches, tics, and then it eventually became tonic-clonic seizures, and then she went into a coma in the dog and cat hospital. And at that time, I was studying homeopathy, So Dr. Ivan Picho, who was helping me, he was my teacher at that time, was helping me with the remedies, and thank goodness, the the doctors in the dog hospital were um, helping me administer the remedies. So from a coma, it took maybe, wow, I must have tried like 20 different remedies. I actually don't even know which one it was that worked. But anyone with a child that has seizures know that, you don't sleep. This was over 9 months. She passed away 9 months later, but ironically not because of her seizure, but because of doggy dengue, and I was not in town to treat it. So within 2 months from her coma, this is her, she had permanent twitching. So, in other words, and actually I kind of regret kind of saving her life, because this is how she was 24/7, except when she would sleep. And then she got progressively better. Oh, Bindi, I miss you. So this was her about 7 months later. She was already able to walk. Oops, can we see the remedy? Can we see the video? Oh, I don't know what happened. We can't see the video. Anyway, that's, if for those that can see the video, that's Bindi, but she could only walk around in circles. So this is when I figured that sometimes, it was probably better to have let her pass. And eventually she did from doggy dengue. But that just goes to show you how effective homeopathy can be. Here we have a case of psoriasis. So homeopathy is also very effective for chronic conditions. It also depends on how much medication, usually how much medication and how much medical interventions they've had. Because homeopathy will always try to bring it back to its previous layer of health. But if you've done too much interventions, like you've already had cataract surgery or glaucoma surgery, it's very hard to reverse from that stage. So psoriasis, we have eczema. So homeopathy will also release what's been suppressed. So this child developed eczema at a very young age. The mother was on medication throughout her pregnancy to keep him. So he probably developed this as a reaction to that. And he was on a lot of steroids prior to seeing me. So I warned the mother that don't get scared, but what's going to happen is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Because homeopathy works to release the diseased layer while steroids works to suppress it. So that's why you have to be very careful when doing homeopathy with steroids. So sure enough, after a couple of days, she's like, the baby is inflamed, everything came out. I said, just relax, rub coconut oil on it, just keep it, bear with it, because it's going to get better. And within 1 month, look how smooth the baby's skin was as it released the whole disease layer. Okay, so here are the references. I'm going to keep it at this page so that you all can see all the different kinds. You can take a screenshot of that. Okay. Okay. Which remedy for eczema? Many different remedies for eczema, but the one I used here was sulfur. So I tend to use a few: sulfur, arsenicum album, graphites. So it's very individualized. So you have to get the symptom picture, the generals, and the modalities before you can prescribe. Okay. So I guess just drop me any questions? So far we have no more questions. Let me just stop share. So anyway, I'd like to thank you guys for joining my class today, my webinar. And I'm going to come up with a I have a class coming up next week on emergency homeopathy. It's going to be via Zoom classroom. And I will put the information. Where should I put the information? I'll put the information on the comments on the Facebook Live here. Okay, I'm still trying to figure this out. So I have a Zoom class coming up just for emergency. So I've broken it down into, because it's a lot of information. I'll have one on emergency, and then I'll have one on acute. So for acute respiratory, acute digestive, and then I'll have one on for musculoskeletal. So I'm going to be breaking down the courses so it can fit into 6 hours per week. Because if not, it's a lot of information to absorb. So the course that I'm going to have in Zoom is separate from the remedies. You can take the course. It's 2,000 per course, and you can just order the remedies, and I can send them to you through Lalamove. Okay, so I don't know where to put it. I don't know where to put the information on the course. Here. Okay, so course info. Did that work? No, it didn't. Or maybe it did. Okay, anyway, it's there. Oh, yes, here. So that's the link. And I'll post the link. That's the link to the workshop. And I will post the link also on my Facebook status. So anyway, I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you so much. Sometimes, I'm glad you guys chatted with me, because it actually really feels weird talking to myself. I hope you learned a lot from this. I just want everyone to know there's nothing to fear with this pandemic. If you know about immunity, if you know about the vital force, if you know about homeopathy, naturopathy, if you know about eating healthy, if you know about staying healthy, keeping a clear mind, there's it's actually a good reset we're having now. It's a time that we can assess the life choices that we've made. We have no choice but to assess the life choices that we've made, right? So look at this as a blessing in disguise. Not everyone is as lucky as us, so we help as much people as we can. We can always evolve our businesses to include those that will not have a job in the future. It's a time to look for opportunities rather than to dwell on what's going on. Shut off the news. I think that's the best advice I can give, is to shut off the news. And just be healthy, stay happy. Drop me a line, and take care, everyone. Okay, now I just don't know how to shut this off. Help. Okay. End meeting. Bye.